So, good morning, everyone. This is Rita Choi, founder of AsiaHRM and AsiaHR Women Club. I'm so glad here today. We are having this monthly webinar, and again on the DEI-related topic. And the topic for today is building organizational resilience using diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I believe some of you may not know AsiaHRM or AsiaHR Women Club well, so maybe taking this opportunity, I would love to give you a brief introduction of both organizations. For me, I'm from Hong Kong, Rita. I've been in the human resources for over 25 years, and have the passion for HR, for sharing the best practices with our practitioners in Asia. And for AsiaHRM is an organization founded and headquarters in Hong Kong. Its mission is to help HR practitioners across Asia excel in their careers. To achieve this, we offer a wide range of activities and programs, including HR talks, training sessions, mentoring, and coaching. And these initiatives are designed to support our HR professionals and people managers at all levels throughout the Asia region. And complementing the work of AsiaHRM, we have the AsiaHR Women Club. And again, it's based in Hong Kong. And this organization is dedicated to promoting diversity, equity, inclusion in Asia. It does this primarily through webinars, just like what we are doing today, and training programs. And for today, I'm so glad that I have invited two experts in DE&I. And as I mentioned, right, they're going to talk about how to build DE&I, right? I think it's DEIB, right? Now we have B, right? DEIB, how to build DEIB resilient. So, and they are VK Lee and also Sagaritka. That they're going to give you a brief introduction of themselves. So without further ado, I would like to pass the control to them. And for the format of today, we are going to have the presentation for around 45 minutes, followed by Q&A session. If you do have any questions, just leave your question in the Q&A box and they'll be answered. Thank you. Enjoy the session.
Thank you, Rita. Now, before I begin, I just wanted to make a disclaimer. I have a bit of a cold, so I might come across as a bit nasal, so my apologies for that. But once again, thank you, Rita, AsiaHRM and AsiaHR Women Club, for the warm welcome and the exciting opportunity for Aeon to share our views about DEIB today. My name is VK and I'm a partner of Aeon. I currently look after the talent solutions team in Hong Kong, but I'm originally from Singapore. Other than my 12 years with Aeon, I've also taken on corporate roles before looking after group functions as the head of HR and also being the global head of reward. With me here today is my esteemed colleague, Sagaritka Roy. We call her Sago, and she represents the part of Aeon that does all the exciting stuff within HR. Sago has recently been leading our efforts in doing job redesign aligned with the future of work. She's also been looking at DEIB, including pay equity and transparency, and also another fast emerging area, which is skills-based job architecture designs. I'm pretty sure you have come across all of these terms one way or another. Now, let's start by aligning what the definition of DEIB represents. Even at the beginning of this session, you will see that we've used different terms. Some people use DEI, some use EDI, which stands for Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion. Some use DIB, Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging. But regardless of what terms you use, everyone today will acknowledge that diversity is about bringing different voices and viewpoints together. The end outcome that we want to achieve is that we want better ideas and solutions because of the diverse backgrounds and experiences that this will bring together. Of course, other than gender focus, which is what Asia tends to look at, and race diversity, which is what the West looks at, there's a lot more other different definitions of diversity. We will share some of those later, but ultimately, when you look at the quadrant around diversity, it is all about recognizing uniqueness. Now, the next part of DEIB is about equity, and equity is about fundamentally giving everyone a fair chance. despite where our starting points might be. And this could mean equal treatment, access, and opportunity. It's about respect for the individual. Equity efforts exist in all forms, and the aim is to promote justice, fairness, and impartiality. If we move on to inclusion, inclusion is about creating a culture where everybody feels welcome and they feel like they can actively contribute and participate. Therefore, if you really think about what inclusion is about, it's about enabling employees to flourish and succeed. And when you put all of this together, regardless of which are the different terms that are being used, you notice that they all share the same interwoven values, and the outcome that we want to drive at is to cultivate a sense of belonging in the workplace, where modern humans spend a big portion of their lives. It's about making everyone feel like they're a full member of the larger community and they can bring their true selves and thrive at the workplace. So why is it important that organizations think about DIB? Number one, the reason is very simple. It is simply the right thing to do. What are the reasons why is it important? Number two, it's good for productivity. And last but not least, it's also good for the branding, the employer branding of the company, and is now part of the broader ESG movement. Now, if we go on to the next page, other than gender and race, there are many dimensions of DIB, which is an extension of an individual's personal identity that could impact and influence a variety of topics across the workforce and across the employee life cycle. But regardless of which areas of diversity that you look at, what is more important is that a deliberate DIB strategy supports what HR is fundamentally supposed to do, which is to help attract and retain talent. Now, if you look at the next page, we start having a look at what the global DIB landscape looks like. Compared to as recent as 10 years ago, we have made big strides. In Northern America, it's extremely common, and they've gotten so advanced that they are starting to think of DIB metrics and goals. If you look at Europe and Latin America, they are not lagging behind, and they have very similar statistics around expanding talent pools and communicating clear DIB objectives. Middle East and Africa have created or planning to create metrics or goals, and in APAC, more than 80% have described their program as important or extremely important. Now, regardless of which continent you look at, all of them are reporting very, very high figures of above 70% in terms of the important DIB initiatives that they're undertaking. Now, with the global landscape in mind, I will now hand over to the real expert, Sago, to take you through what organizations are doing about Aon's DI maturity curve and lots of exciting stuff that could get you or your organizations ahead. Over to you, Sago.
Thank you, VK, and thank you, Rita, and thank you, VK, for indulging me here. But this is so fantastic, talking to all of you today. Incidentally, we are in Pride Month, so we are looking at DEI now in a lot newer light than what we have looked at in the past, right? VK mentioned a few moments back about usually in the past when we were looking at DEI, we were just considering gender, and make no mistake, it was an important element to look at. But today we are seeing the definition of how organizations are looking at DEI or DEIB is a lot wider than what it has been in the past, especially the cross-sectionality of DEI that firms are looking at is something that we have observed like never before. I'll quickly start by again stating, some of the points that, VK mentioned in terms of what is it that it's driving DEI, all this, as VK mentioned, it is the right thing to do. So why did it take organizations this long to start delving on DEI in a more senior fashion than what we have seen in the past? And there are a couple of things that we have observed has coming out as a trend. Number one, it comes from a very focused view on the fact that it helps you attract, recruit, retain, your colleagues. And, we all today are hiring, Gen Zs today. We are all hiring, millennials today. And we do realize that the expectations that, these colleagues have from the organization goes beyond just, just the fact that what is my role and how much money am I going to get and what's the growth opportunity. Today, it's a lot wider than what it has been in the past. I was recently, taking an interview of a young candidate, fresh out of college, and I was asked questions around, what are the ESG practices of my organization? How do we look at DEI practices in the organization? Questions that were never asked to me before in interviews. And we see this whole trend about how seriously our colleagues and employees looking at DEI as part of how they operate in the organization. That's number one. Number two, and number 2 and 3 are actually quite related to each other, which is around minimizing risk and exposure, and the general market volatility that's going on at the moment. I'll make a small point here. In the last few years, the number of high-profile cases that you may have heard, both in the Western Hemisphere as well as in the Eastern Hemisphere, around practices that have not been pro-DEI has never been seen before, right? So there is a lot of focus around it. And as a result of which, a lot of organizations often get bad press or bad PR. What firms are doing, and again, we don't say that this is a right way to go about it, but firms are realizing that the legal risk and the operational risk around not doing the right thing is a lot more. It's not just limited to monies today. And hence, we see that firms are, investing in DEI practices, investing in equity practices, so that this risk can be mitigated. The next point that we observe is around, enhancing investor appeal and winning clients. Again, for all of you, you deal with clients day in, day out. So do we. Today, when we sign contracts today, when we are signing contracts with a client, we are often asked questions about our ESG practices. We are asked questions around our DEIR, our RP equity practices. Again, questions that we have not been asked for contracting purposes in the past. The idea here is that, firms are doing their own piece, where the accountability is not just for them to do the right thing, but they're also putting accountability to their suppliers, to their customers, to ensure that, this kind of practices are well evolved and are practiced across the universe that they operate in. And of course, the last benefit of it, and possibly the one that we will underline the most, is the fact that when you have a diverse workforce, when you have a workforce which feels belonging, it creates a kind of this resilience. It creates a kind of, that skill level, that ownership that, colleagues have, that you will not have in a non-diverse workforces. I mean, there has been enough and more research that has been done around the fact that how, a more diverse board creates better results. I mean, Aon has been doing a study like this since 2010. Which just talks about the fact that the more diversity that you have at workforce, more diversity that you have board, will produce more results. And today we are seeing organizations adopting those in a far serious manner than what we have seen in the past. We'll share a quick snapshot again to reinforce, some of the results from our global DEI study that we did recently. Very similar to what VK mentioned, upwards of 90% of the organizations have senior leadership support for sponsoring of DEI practices. And I would like you to remember this particular point, because you'll see that, as we go towards how do we implement DEI, this kind of, sponsorship from leadership becomes critical. 83% of the companies have identified colleagues for leading DEI practices. And you'll be surprised to know that how many of them are not really HR folks. While HR may do program management, but what, organizations are saying, and this is something that many of us heard possibly in, 10 years back, when we started, hearing some of these things in the past, where when we started about culture, and folks started saying that, hey, culture is not an HR problem. today we are saying that DEI is not an HR problem. You actually need sponsorship from across businesses, across functions, to ensure that DNA of your organization is changed and they think DEI. It's not some program that is run by HR once a quarter, once a half a year, right? So that's the big change that we're observing. And of course, we see almost like 3/4 of the organizations was develop some form of DEI policies in place. Now it translates very, into the kind of, what are the top areas that we are covering. And VK is absolutely right that in Asia, we see gender to be, number one, number one parameter of, diversity that firms are looking at. But we are also looking at ethnicity and sexual orientation have come up as important parameters that firms look at when they're looking at DEI activity. Now, quickly moving on, and I'll not spend a lot of time on the slide, but it just reinforces the point I was making on the fact that DEI is not an HR problem, or DEI is not something that only HR needs to own. Yes, of course, for a matter that is going to impact all employees, which is going to impact the way you do business, the way it's going to have your, your policies and processes, HR leaders will play a critical role. But what we are also seeing over the period of time that outside of, your HR leaders, we are also seeing deep interest from, the C-suites of organization, board of directors, the risk team, that are also being heavily involved in ensuring that you have the right DEIB practices. I'm sure some of you read an article recently that a bank spoke about the C-suite of the bank committed that, they will have a certain amount of gender ratio in the organization across their own vertical. So it's not like overall, let's do that. The idea that they were trying to promote is that how do we ensure that we have the right economic participation of women across all levels and not just possibly at the entry level and so on and so forth. So we are seeing that this kind of interest that's not just limited to HR anymore. We are seeing this in other parts of the businesses as well. There is one particular team that you will see that is possibly more interested than others, and that's your compensation leaders at the moment. And I'll talk about it more at length later. But just to give you a hint, why compensation leaders are more talking about it is simply because this entire wave, this entire momentum around pay equity and pay transparency that is coming up. You've seen and heard enough around, the US regulation, the UK regulations, the European laws that have been come out, and similar regulations are coming in Asia as well. We've already seen, Australia and Japan leading the pack, and we do anticipate this to come across all leading economies in Asia in some form or the other. And hence, it's keeping a lot of your compensation leaders up at night to say that, how do I get prepared for that change? As my regulation will start asking me to start, disclosing information around pay, around promotions, around gender economic participation, and so on and so forth. So that's the thing that we are observing when we are building, seeing interest levels from various stakeholders. Now, once we do that, and like anything else, any kind of a journey goes through various stages. Now, what you see in front of you is the Aon DEI maturity curve. You will see that organizations, when it comes to talking about DEI, are, they can fall anywhere between foundational, reactive, proactive, advanced, and leading. And let me spend a little bit of time on each one of them. Now, when we talk about organizations who do not have a clear DEIB strategy, they are just starting to think about what their DEI strategies should be, or policy should be, or they feel that there is a form of apathy in the organization around DEI. At this stage, when they start doing any kind of effort, it is mostly to create awareness in the organization and not so much action. So just to say that, hey, don't make a sexist remark when woman comes back from her maternity leave. It's a very simple thing. Some of you may have observed it in your organization. Unfortunately, some of you may have actually even gone through some of these comments in your organizations. Some, and I like to believe that this does not necessarily comes from a place of malice, but general awareness about, what is the right thing to do. So that's the first part, where we don't have any practices in place, where we see some amount of apathy, but we are working towards creating awareness. Quite frankly, it is one of the most important ones, because you're understanding that there is a need and you're starting to build awareness around it. So that's number one. That's foundational. Then go to reactive. When we talk about reactive, a large part of this reactive kind of organizations are actually doing what the government or the regulators are asking them to do. So you build your broad, inclusive, definitions of DEI. You start talking to your leaders about, what are the big changes that are required. You at least start doing some kind of analytics around this data. So what kind of gender, what kind of ethnicity, or whatever, that analysis that is important for your organization, you start doing, and you create awareness around this in a lot more topical fashion than what you have heard doing in the foundational stage. Now, at this stage, a large part of your work is to ensure that you remain compliant with what the government is asking. So, for example, what is the law of the land when it comes to maternity leave? So you're doing that. What is the law of the land to give leaves related to religious festivals? Are you compliant with that? What is the law of the land to say you will do equitable pay, or at least disclosing your pay levels by gender? So at this stage, you are doing the bare minimum. You're ensuring that you are doing whatever the government regulators are asking you to do, but at the same time, you've started educating your leaders to start thinking what the future is going to be, to ensure that you're able to build a case for big changes in the future. Now, in all reality, most organizations that Vicky and I work with largely sit into the reactive stage, right? Because we're all large organizations. You don't want to be non-compliant, so you're compliant with what the government is asking you to do. We see, and we're making a generic statement about how it happens in Asia, but broadly you will see most organizations sit here. We don't see many organizations at the foundational stage, because at least most of them are at least following the law of the land, right? So at least that much is getting done. Now, the third stage is when you start, setting standards and objectives. So you do the bare minimum, you are compliant, but how do you proactively start thinking about, what my DEIB practices are going to be? So meaning that you start talking about the fact that, hey, how do I ensure that I train managers to have sensitive conversation around pay equity? Or, hey, how do I put, my talent, attraction, or my selection or recruitment policy in such a way that unconscious biases are removed, so that I'm able to get the right kind of talent? So if I'm asking this thing around, do I want to hire neurodiverse colleagues in my organization? Does my recruitment policy allows me to do that or not? Or there is some kind of a bias built in which does not allow it. So here you take it a step forward. You start thinking about, how do I set processes and policies in place in this case, and then how am I using various forms of data to take the right decision? So for example, you start analyzing the data not just by gender. One important part that you see here that firms started doing is that cross-sectionality of colleagues when you're doing this analytics. So for example, I was once working with a US organization where they said, hey, I don't only want to look at women, I actually want to look at women of color, or I want to look at women of a certain religion, who are who don't have enough representation in the workforce. So you start looking at cross-sectionality in a very different fashion than just looking at one, let's just do it by gender or let's just do it by age and so on and so forth. So you're thinking in future. One big change that happens here is that you see active leadership involvement. Right now, today, in reactive, when you're getting leaders ready, when you are creating that awareness, when you're educating them, in this case, your leaders are you're already advocating, what you want to do, and then getting that education around. The next two levels are around advanced and leading. When we talk about advanced, again, this takes a step forward, where you're talking about you're embedding strategies of DEIB in your overall business. The way you do business keeps DEI in the context of it, right? So you have very mature practices, you have clear leadership involvement. Some organizations, VK works very closely with boards, and he can tell you this. Some organizations have put together very serious performance goals for senior leaderships around DEI, which is linked to their performance goals, right? Or their performance bonus. Now, that's the kind of seriousness that we're talking about, that if you're unable to, contribute to the DEI goals, and even if you are meeting all your business goals, your performance bonuses will still take some kind of a hit. So that's the kind of seriousness that we are talking about. And then, of course, the leading one, where your DEIB goals, your ESG goals, equity goals are all integrated, and DEI becomes a way of life. Now, there are a few organizations, and without taking names here, some tech organizations who have led the path. But in all reality, we know that, business realities take over some of these goals. We don't see many organizations operating on the right mode side, but we do we do know of many organizations who are in the advanced stage who want to go towards leading and are working towards it. Now, before you start thinking about what my DEIB journey is going to look like, what are the practices that I need, the first step that we need to take into consideration is, do I know where am I in terms of DEIB, right? And why this becomes important is simply the fact that till the time I don't know what my starting point is, it becomes very difficult for us to understand, what my future can look like. Because I may want to have, and again, this is an example of a client, I was talking to a couple of years back, and we started talking about what their DEIB goal is going to be. This was a manufacturing organization, so they were at a very early stages of their own DEIB journey. And this gentleman, and I'll never forget what he said. He said that, Chagorika, the way I am envisaging my DEIB as an organization is that of a Bentley, right? But where I am right now, all that I can drive is possibly an early stage hatchback car. And for me to start planning for a Bentley at this stage may not necessarily bear results, because at this stage, you either call it Bentley or flying cars, it doesn't make a difference. It's so far from reality. So I'm building my DEIB practices step by step, where I'm learning just, I'm moving from a cycle to a hatchback car, and then I'll move forward from there. And this story stuck with me simply because, he was very practical about the fact that, how do I go to my journey, what my future vision is, and how do I break it down into more bite-sized ways of doing things, so that I'm evolving, I'm not running before I can walk. And to do that, we went back to the fact to understand that what is it that they are in terms of their DEIB practices, and how is it that they can evolve from it. So we did, a DEIB audit, and you'll see this on the right side of your page. It looks at these 12 parameters of DEIB, which are broken down into the 4 highlighted one that you see outside, and it helps us understand what is required, where you are, and how you're going to make changes so that you are prepared for the next few years. Now, this particular page just quickly takes you through around, how do you embed a DEIB, process I'll not go into a lot of details. It does take a lot of time when we are breaking it down, but just for your appreciation, understand this, that, when you start your journey, there are these 5 things that you need to take into consideration. Number 1, assess the current state. So we spoke about, the DEIB audit, any form of audit that helps you understand where you are right now, your current state. The next is leadership-driven policy enhancement. And here is where I go back to the early points that I made, that without leadership sponsorship, without leadership involvement, any of our DEIB activities will become, nice-looking documents which we put on our intranet, but are not really practiced, right? So, and here is where we said, how do you get leaders involved? You get, inclusive assessments done. You tailor workshop based on what your leaders want to drive business results, and then you help them understand how DEI can drive that result for you. Of course, that moves into cultural integration. So again, once you have your leadership sponsorship, you build your programs and policies, and then you start embedding it in the way you do your work, right? So it's a step-by-step, brick by brick. A hatchback car is the concept that you need to take as you're building that, long-term change. Then reinforce through award, right? And I'm a firm believer of the fact that instead of naming and shaming, that, if someone has not been, doing, what becomes more important is how do you reinforce positive behavior? And that plays a big role in actual cultural building in the organization. So, a manager who has understood DEI well, making a case study, getting him to speak. Because again, very similar to culture, and I go back to this over and over again, you need spokesperson in your organization who can do it for you. It's not something, HR can't come and say, or business leaders can't come and say that tomorrow onwards we'll be a diverse organization and everything is going to be fine. You need advocates at all levels who are talking this talk with you, who are spending as much effort and energy as you are as you're building this energy, so that, the reinforcement is happening from all sides. And of course, like anything else, you do continuous improvement, right? So you do a step, you see what's working, you do your pilots, ensure that it's in place, make changes and move on. And that's how, you go from foundational to leading. Now, quickly, just giving you a highlight here around, when you start thinking about DEI practices, from foundational to leading, you'll see that there are various kind of activities that you can do, right? So, for example, if you're in foundational, just start thinking about inclusive mindset training. And we work with clients very closely with all of these solutions that you see here. Or if you're at a proactive stage, how do you democratize your potential and opportunity? How do you ensure that you have the right kind of IJPs? How do you ensure that you have the right kind of retirement plans that you have in place, and so on and so forth? So you go through, you choose what are the solutions you want to evolve based on where you are in terms of your own maturity level. But if there are 2 things that, we feel that organizations must do, irrespective of whether they are at foundational or at leading, are these 2 bottom ones that you see here right now, which is pay equity and gap analysis, and external disclosure alignment and gap analysis. And why we say this is, again, it goes back to the point that in the last few years, the amount of focus that we have heard from regulators as well as organizations around pay equity and pay transparency, as it's like never before, right? There's this huge focus that we get from organizations, and we are often asked this question: how do we build on it? So much so that we did a survey end of last year, early this year, and almost 350 organizations who participated in the survey, almost 80% of them said that pay equity and pay transparency is very important for us. And it's important that we need to start thinking about it today, because even though regulation is not live, we know it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Now, I use the word pay equity and pay transparency and pay gap and all of that, and oftentimes, we feel that there is some bit of a misunderstanding or misalignment of understanding. So allow me a few moments to take you through what these elements are. When we talk about pay gap is the average pay difference between two groups of employees. Typically, when governments ask you to disclose pay gaps, they're asking for this, and they're essentially asking for gender pay gap in most cases, especially in Asia, right? So pay gap is average men pay, average women pay, and then you say, what the difference is going to be. Many times when you hear the word, women make 30 cents to $1 in some industries, this is what it means, right? It's average pay gap. Pay equity means that you start now for this average pay, you're actually comparing some people who are doing, right? So here is about equal pay for equal work, right? Equity is a step forward from pay gap, because now you're saying that for the same kind of efforts, am I paying equally or not? Pay transparency is when we involve disclosing compensation practices, policies, pay levels to both your employees as well as to outsiders. Now, pay transparency is in two parts. One is the pay gap disclosure, which the government is asking for, and then pay transparency, which is more softer in cases where you're talking about compensation, philosophy, merit pay budgets, and so on and so forth. So these are three or four, key items. If I can request you to keep in mind, it will help you articulate the next, few slides that I'm going to present. Very quickly, again, I mentioned that pay transparency and pay equity importance is on the rise. You'll observe that almost 80% of the organizations that we surveyed said that it is important for them, right? So most organizations are keeping it on top of their radar at the moment. And then one asks that, why is it that, pay equity and transparency is important? There are three big parameters that we are seeing, three big drivers: regulation and compliance, company DEI policy, and peer practices. Why regulation and compliance, even though there isn't compliance here? As I said, firms, first of all, believe that, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. It has happened in the West. We are already seeing footprints of it happening in Japan, in Australia, in Singapore, in India. There are these small, kind of regulations that are coming, which are not mandatory. They will become mandatory soon. So there is an anticipation. Number two, a lot of MNC companies, whatever they're doing in the West, right, because there by law they have to do these DEI and pay equity practices, they're mimicking their efforts here in Asia. And number three, Asian giants, who are headquartered out of Asia but are now spreading footprint in the Western Hemisphere, they have to comply with the law of the land in the West. And they're saying that if I'm doing it for the West, I got to do it for my people where I have a larger footprint here. So I need to do it now. So hence, regulation plays an important role. Of course, company DEI policy, almost 60% of the respondents are saying that that's also a big driver for them to say that I need to pay equitably to ensure that, my people feel a sense of fairness in the organization. Now, moving on, from a pay equity perspective, when we see most of the organizations, almost, about 25% of the organizations are actually proactively sharing information around compensation to colleagues. However, for a majority of them, this is still not done as proactively. So while the importance of pay transparency remains, organizations are adopting a cautious approach when they're thinking about pay equity and pay transparency practices. So 25% are doing it proactively, but a large part of them are, still doing it on a slightly ad hoc basis, or may not do it, may not give all the information that is required. Now, outside of pay equity, the next question that we often try and understand is that outside of pay transparency, the next question that we often ask is, do you conduct a pay equity analysis? Because you can do pay transparency without doing pay equity, meaning many of you may have experienced it yourself, that your organization publishes compensation philosophy on the intranet, or publishes information around, merit pay increases on the intranet, right? That's also pay transparency. Pay equity comes in when we are saying that, okay, I need to know that what is my current gap, and then I am transparently sharing information with my colleagues. Now, a large French giant recently published white papers, published, did a lot of news articles on the fact that women in their organization, and they have about 120,000 people globally, that they pay their women folks 98 cents to a dollar across the globe. Now, that kind of pay transparency comes in when you do pay equity studies and, of course, make remediation efforts based on it. Now, here we observe that, almost 62% of the organizations, that we surveyed are doing pay equity analysis. Of these organizations, we observe that almost 50% of them do it yearly, and about 50% of them do it once in 2 years or on an ad hoc basis. Again, there is no right or wrong answer on the frequency of it. It depends on, what kind of, like, for example, what is the result that came out of your first analysis? Is the gap a lot? Do you have a lot of budget for remediation? Are you hiring a lot because of which your demography is going to change? Is there going to be a significant M&A, again, because of which your demography is going to change? A lot of these variables impact the answer on how often should you do your pay equity study. Final few slides on this. As you are doing your pay equity analysis, the other thing that we consider is what are the factors on which you should do pay equity study. Of course, gender is one, but you'll observe that in Asia, except the large organization where who are hiring more than 50,000 people, you don't necessarily see gender as the driving factor here. Here we see other what we call legitimate factors as the important drivers for this analysis. So these are job family, performance rating, experience, and so on and so forth. Now, again, make no mistake, we are not saying that, organizations in Asia don't think that, there is a gender-based equity issue. But what they are saying is that, hey, let me do this analysis on these legitimate factors and make remediation plans accordingly. And as I fix my, pay levels based on these legitimate factors, as and when the laws and regulations comes for me to start analyzing on gender, I would have fixed a lot of problems. Because just gender-based pay does not help me understand, am I comparing equal pay for equal work or not? So this is what we are calling, organizations are doing that homework to ensure that, I'm able to do remediation plans on things that I can control immediately. Finally, a few things as you start on your pay equity, journey. These are, 6 questions that we will request you to answer as you start thinking about how do you prepare for it. One is, do you have a gender-neutral analytical job evaluation methodology? This becomes very important. We've in fact recently released a white paper which actually talks about why it is important to have an analytical job evaluation program, simply because if you have to do an equity study, if you don't have a scientific base for doing these comparisons, it will become very difficult for you to later defend any of these analytics. Again, without taking time, a large European bank quite recently was fined $2 million because the court of this particular country found that the pay equity analysis that was done was not done on a scientific way, where the foundation was not analytical, right? So it ensures that the minute you have job architecture which is scientifically driven, a lot of the analysis that you will do will be defensible. Number 2, do you have clear processes, guidance, governance in place? Again, the fact is that if you don't fix this, because if remediation is just based on monies, if remediation is just based on monies, it becomes very difficult to, it becomes very difficult to keep funding that over and over again. And hence it's important that you put these governance programs in place to ensure that, you don't create the same problems that you have had in the past, right? It doesn't create the notion of a leaking bucket. Number 3, conducting an internal pay equity review, just to understand the current state. Very similar to DEI, right? To know the audit, where you are, what is your starting point. Here also it's important to conduct internal pay equity review just to see that what is the delta, how far are you from where you want to be, and then what kind of budgets do you need, and what are there severe problems in certain section vis-a-vis others, just to ensure that you're building your analysis and you're building your implementation plan based on scientific information. And then of course, once you know what your current gap is, as you start getting ready for your pay transparency plan, how confident are you? Can you defend it? Do you have the right communication plan or not? And then of course, all of this is brought together for the fact that are you ready to share a lot more information beyond your pay transparency? Can you defend your grading system? Can you go back and tell your employees that, what kind of data do you use for doing any of this analysis? You'll see that there are many intertwined, interlinked elements here. Pay equity does not stand in itself. It's not a silo. You need to work with various elements as you start preparing for it. The last thing that I'll talk about here is that at the moment we are talking about pay equity, what is important is that we start thinking about total rewards equity as we plan for this in the future. And that's very closely linked to the DEI fact that we mentioned, right? So when I say total rewards equity, I'm not just talking about pay, I'm talking about retirement, I'm talking about benefits. You have a more wider view to ensure that, you are protecting your colleagues and you're creating a sense of fairness in the organization. I'll stop here. This is again, a quick note for you to take into consideration how you build your DEIB organization. How do you build inclusive ways of working? How do you collaborate? What kind of communication that you need? And these are on your slides for you to read. But we have about 12 minutes left, so I thought that possibly we can take a quick pause here, see if there are any questions you would like us to answer. Rita?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sakura, yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. I do have a question. That you mentioned that I'm not sure it's too sensitive for you to share this information. I think that would be the experience that you have with the clients, but you don't have to disclose the name. I hope you can share some information. Because when you were walking through with us the different stages of implementing DEIB, right? We started with awareness, and then some company is already at the advanced stage. And then they even set DEIB as their KPI, right? So
Yeah.
I really wanted to know what sort of KPIs do they set, and also what sort of impact that they can really see from the company, from the business perspective.
So, Rita, if I understood you right, you're saying that, how is DEIB included in the KPI of leaders? Is that what your question is?
Correct. Yes, and how do they measure it, especially from the business impact perspective?
Yeah. So I'll take a shot at it. And, VK, if you have similar experience when you work with, board members and, CEOs, one of the things that, Rita, we have observed is that, oftentimes when we design these long-term incentives for senior leadership, there was a time when, organizations started including KPIs that were related to ESG, right? So it was a more environment, social governance kind of a thing. They had some goals. It could be carbon footprint reduction, or it could be, if I'm a bank, lending or not lending to someone who's involved in higher carbon footprint emission, and so on and so forth, right? So that is how we started observing it in the past. What we have now observed is that it goes a level lower, right? So even at a CXO level, the DEI KPIs could look like what is the gender ratio within your organization. And, for example, let's say I'm a CFO, the gender ratio, or how do you ensure, what kind of KPIs you have linked to the fact that, that women, and in this case, that I'm talking about, are growing across all levels within the organization. Now, you will observe that, a CFO cannot do this by themselves. It needs to work closely with multiple other, senior stakeholders. But the idea here is to bring CXOs together to, ensure that, this parameter of the goal that has been set is met or not. And they, of course, have a weightage, and then, depending on what, how they perform on it, their bonuses get impacted. VK, have you seen anything on ESG and DEI when you're doing such LTI designs?
Yes, so the common ones that we see are around, for example, this is perhaps the most common one, the diversity of the applicant pool, because that will give you a good indication of whether your firms is being perceived that they provide equal opportunity to everyone. If your applicant pool only falls within a certain socio-economic status or a certain race or gender, then I think that indicates some things are wrong. On the flip side, diversity of the hiring panel, that's something else that gets looked at. Also, when organizations report in their annual reports, they usually also report a lot of demographic data. So, percentage of people falling within a certain race, gender, ethnicity, etc. Whether you have certain number of managers that are female versus male. I think those are by far the most common ones that we see.
Yeah, but how about the impact? Because we all believe that, right? Having inclusive voices, right, will really ultimately lead to the better business result. But can we really tell from the business result that because of these kind of measures in place, we are able to see a better one, like in the leading stage, right? Even they can realize the return on value of DEIB, right? So I would love to see what kind of return that people can see, especially from the management can see at this stage.
I think one of the, I cannot translate this directly into a return, but for example, a lot of companies now, especially in the West, when they pick a partner or a supplier that they work with, one of the criteria that they look for is that you must comply with certain DEIB policies. In fact, this also extends to investors. Certain institutional investors, they say that I cannot invest in this company unless there's certain DEIB or broader ESG metrics in place. And having that kind of investors, having a broader supplier relationship partnerships, all of this very clearly will translate into business results.
So it's not a direct impact, Rita. Another example that I'll give you, I was working with a client in the Scandinavia, and they have very specific rule on modern days anti-slavery act, right? So, your workshops or your factories cannot have children or, people under the age of 15 working, and they will conduct those audits. And if you're unable to meet that, and they at one point of time were, a lot of their suppliers were based out of Asia, and, organizations were based on Asia who were suppliers actually had to relook at their entire demographic to say that, whether we will be able to continue our business or not. So it's an indirect way of looking at it, but, it is happening. We are doing it. I said, right? I mean, we are now giving declarations that there are no children working in Aeon, or there are, very specific, that our DEI practices, that we are an equal opportunity organizations.
If I may add, one of the earliest things that I said was the whole point of doing a DEIB strategy is to support what HR is supposed to do anyway, which is attract and retain talent. So one of the direct impact that one should be able to see, and they should go and measure it, is it should in theory reduce your time in terms of filling positions, because you become a more attractive employer to especially Gen Z talent. It should also reduce your turnover rates, because the whole point of doing DEI is to increase that sense of belonging. So retention rates should also increase, and whenever attraction, the time to fill up jobs or your turnover is lower, all these directly contributes to cost savings and also increase employment.
Nice one. Yeah, I think this is really, we can really see the impact of DEIB, right? On especially on the recruitment side, and also on the impact on staff retention. Yeah.
Great.
Very nice. So any questions from the participants here? It seems that some of them have to leave, right? So any questions for the speakers today? Any questions? Oh, Angel, would you mind if you will just open the mic and then speak up?
Hi.
Hi,
Yeah.
Angel.
Yeah. So far, not really have the question. It's because my company haven't implemented DEI, so I'm still trying to understand it. Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, it's very important. I was in the talent management conference yesterday, and then there was some which I think survey about Gen Z, right? And I think next year, by the year of 2025, 1 out of 5 employees that we have actually are Gen Z. So basically, what Gen Z wants is they want to work in a company where they provide the environment for inclusivity.
Yeah.
And they really want to have their voice. They really want to see a lot of equities in place in an organization. So as just VK mentioned, right, if we're able to retain or engage these type of people, especially Gen Z, we're able to reduce any staff turnover and also able to engage and retain them. So I think this is a trend for everybody for all the organizations to consider, especially if it's something that Gen Z wants.
Yeah, it's just now. Actually, my company culture is quite different, and then as what Roy just now did share us, like it's really need a managerial teams to like collaborate, work together. But unfortunately, our culture here and some of the team lead is not really cooperate. So it's a bit hard for us in our finance and in our HR department to enroll this DEI. Yeah, we're still trying hard. That's why I will always follow your share HRM to try to understand more and see how to implement in my company.
Yeah, that is very true. I think maybe from the employees, right? They can tell something to the management that if we don't really look at that, I would really rather leave the company instead of staying in your company, right? So because nowadays we are not in this talent war, it's always a challenge to recruit good talents or even to retain them. So then maybe there's another way of telling the management that this is something they need to look into.
Yeah, I'm trying my way. I'll try my hard. Hopefully it can be done by this year.
Yeah, that's right. Any other questions?
Not for me.
Okay. So Saga, thank you, Angel. So Saga, are you having a sort of feedback page for the participants to?
We'll send. So Rita, what we'll do is that we'll send you a link, and we also have a new white paper, fresh off the oven. So we'll share that with you, and then you can share it with the participants. And we'd love to hear more from the group here. We hope that the event was, you found the talk useful. I know we covered a lot in a very short time, but if there is anything that you would like to know more, deep dive more, feel free to reach out.